All right. Good morning and welcome, everyone. Great to be back with you. My name is Michele Floriani. It's my pleasure to be your host today on our ongoing webinar series, The Return to Work, The Path Forward. Today, we have a really relevant and fast-moving topic, understanding the vaccine and recent COVID legislations. We have an amazing panel I'm excited to introduce you to. So let's get started. As always, today is January 28th. Today is a moment in time, and there's a lot of stuff that's going to change after today's webinar, but the people we've brought here today are helping to translate what they see as being relevant and important for you to know. But I want to remind you, as always, check official information providers like the CDC and public health officials and all other kinds of formal information, including your own professionals as you make decisions. But let's move on. Let me set up today's agenda. So I'm actually personally really excited about today's agenda and content because so much of it was influenced by you guys. As we always do, we take the Q&A, we take the emails we get during the week, client discussions, and we weave that into picking our topics. But with vaccines coming on the scene and so many employers and decision makers needing to really understand more about it, understand it from a medical view, understand it from an employer and legal view, we made adjustments as we were coming into this webinar and like doubled down on the vaccine part. So thank you for that input, and thank you to our panelists today for being here, because I think we have a really good webinar. We'll start with the medical view. So we have two great doctors I'll introduce you in a sec, but we will look at what's happening from the vaccine from a medical standpoint and from a serving through medicine standpoint. So that should hopefully get everyone kind of smart and calibrated on the latest understanding of what's happening in the landscape of the vaccine. Then we'll look at it from a legal perspective, which is really centered around employers and mandates around vaccinations and other things attached to this, obligations that you have. So we'll get that translated. And then we'll land in the employer view, which is really about understanding as an employer at the ground level, what are the considerations and what are some solutions and some ways that you can solve it. And that'll be the opportunity for us, of course, to show you also how we're solving it for companies in the context of our Return to Work Center solution. I'm also happy to share and very grateful to our panelists. Many of them will be able to stay on here. We're anticipating there will be a lot of questions. And so we're excited to, if people want to hang out 15 minutes after the webinar, we'll continue answering questions and try to fill in as many gaps as we didn't address during the webinar. But the tool for you is the Q&A. So everyone's in silent mode, listen only mode, but the Q&A is a great way for you to put your questions in there. We've anticipated a lot of them and the ones that we've received during the week. So we'll be putting them into the content naturally. But if anything pops up or you'd like to try to get something addressed during this or in the 15 minutes afterwards, please use the Q&A button on your menu. Okay, couple quick announcements as we fill up the booth here. So first and foremost, just a couple days left to participate in our employee experience benchmark survey. And this, of course, is the survey that feeds the report. And as I've mentioned before, only participants in the survey get the full report. It's very broad, covers everything from healthcare, well-being, policies, the whole bit, global benefits. So if you haven't participated and you'd love the report, go ahead and go to sequoia.com/benchmark, or in our resources section, you'll see the starting point for that. It's a great report. Couple days left. We're shutting it down on Sunday. It moves pretty fast if you have the information that they're asking, near you, or if your team can help out. So, as always, we continue to release reports with pulse surveys from the community and insights. So if this is a new webinar for you and you're sitting here for the first time, go check those out. A lot of people on these webinars actually participated in the surveys and helped put some great knowledge into these books. So they're available for you for free. And I'm super excited to announce The Grove, which is Sequoia's annual conference focused on people first best practices. And this year, of course, we're doing it as a virtual experience. We got a really cool virtual platform we're going to test drive for The Grove, but it'll have the same great content, the same coming together of the Sequoia community, which is, everyone from clients to partners, vendors, a lot of specialists and experts involved. We're going to have a great keynote. I'm excited about to tell you guys all via email in the coming days. And of course, great tracks focused on things that matter to HR and finance and people leaders at People First Company. Check it out, sequoia.com, The Grove, or from our events section. And one of the tracks at The Grove will be the return to work. It'll be kind of a continuation of this series. We'll do it in the context of The Grove. And we'll be showing and demoing, of course, our Return to Work Center. And today, we're going to weave that into that consideration and employer section and show you guys how we're, again, solving some of the challenges employers are facing through the Return to Work Center. I'm very proud of the work that the team's doing on this product, and very grateful for the collaboration that's happening with the clients that are part of this program. So much good, feedback and innovation and creativity coming from clients. Many of them have been on this webinar series like Snap and Allbirds and Remix and Mongo and Roblox, excuse me. And so it's important that that this is a communal thing, right? We're all in it together, working through solutions to help folks return to the workplace. And we'll show you some features today that are directly from those collaborations from our clients. So excited to get to that. If you're not familiar with the Return to Work Center and you want to check it out even further, go naturally to our website, and we have, I got a guy named Landon. He can take you through this stuff. He lives behind this button right here on the web page, or just, hit me up and I'll get you in touch. But he does a great job hearing where people are in their journey back to the workplace, some of the things that are important to them, and trying to show if there's a good solution and fit for what we're doing with Return to Work Center. Okay, enough of the preamble. Looks like we got a bunch of people on the webinar, so let's dive in on our content for today. This is the 13th webinar in this series, and it's been a very rich ongoing discussion, and really excited that the panelists we have today, many of them have been on this throughout the journey of this ongoing discussion. So welcoming back to our webinar series, Dr. Will Kimbrough, who's the Senior Medical Director at One Medical. One Medical is part of our very first webinar on this topic and have been a great partner along the way, as they are equally invested in helping companies through this process. Another partner who's been part of this along the way is Wilson Sonsini, and by extension, the 650 crew, but Marina Satalis has been an awesome translator of what's happening in the legal landscape and helping employers understand some of the considerations. And we'll have her today doing just that. I welcome Dr. Theodore Feldman, who is the Chief Medical Officer at Rightway. Great to have him. He will be part of understanding and unpacking the vaccine.
Welcome back, Jordan Feldman. Also been on the webinar series several times, explaining and helping us understand what's going on in terms of serving and guiding people through the tests and vaccinations. So let me hand it over to some real experts. We'll start with Dr. Will, explaining really where are we right now in the vaccine from a consumer and service standpoint. So Will, over to you.
Thanks, Michele. Nice to see you. And hi, everybody. For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, my name is Will Kimbrough. I'm a practicing internal medicine primary care doctor with One Medical. And prior to COVID, my background was in public health, specifically around respiratory diseases, which always seemed like a fun hobby to have, like as a pre-practice training thing. And then once in a century or so, it turns out to be really useful. So here we are, 10, 11, 12 months into the pandemic. And so let's catch up on where we are in the vaccine. So when we think about this, I don't know how you're feeling personally. I'm sort of sick of kids being in the house on Zoom instead of in classrooms. I'm thinking about giving myself yet another haircut, which is never a good thing. But really just the human toll of this, with some days over 4,000 people a day passing away because of this terrible disease in the US. And these vaccines really are our best ray of light and our best hope and path forward at the moment. And they're frankly just wonders of science that we have two highly effective vaccines that are safe and available, not widely available yet, but available less than a year after the pandemic started. So, really an exciting moment for science and medical history, and what an opportunity for us as a medical community to really help find the path forward to get us the rest of the way out of this. So I tried to choose just one slide to really hit home the impact of these vaccines. And, so this is a little bit of a wonky technical slide, but just to walk you through a little bit, this is from data from the Pfizer vaccine. The blue line is people who got the first dose. The red line is people who were in the study but didn't get an active vaccine. So, they just got salt water basically injected into their arm. And you can see after just day 10 or so, those two lines really separating out. And that's after just one dose. The impact of the vaccines is even greater after the second dose. And so this, in my mind, really drives home just how much of a difference this can and is already having in terms of driving the end of this pandemic, hopefully. So, and when we look at anything with COVID, with a new disease that's less than a year old, we have to think about things in terms of uncertainty and then also sort of read between the headlines a little bit. So I always like to drill down on what do we know so far at this point, and then we'll talk about some of the things where there's still reasonable uncertainty. So just a few points. We do know that these vaccines have been widely studied, both for effectiveness and safety. Tens of thousands of people were tested prior to them getting approved by the FDA. And since then, there have been millions and millions of people across the world who've gotten both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. The current vaccines are only for 16-year-olds and older, and the 16 and 17-year-olds is really only the Pfizer one. The Moderna one is only for 18 and over. So it's still going to be some time before we have any viable vaccine options available for kids. And then just one of the really important things that's sort of a subtle point that's getting lost in translation some here is that even with the vaccines being deployed, it's not time to start taking off masks and going back to normal life just yet, even for people who've been vaccinated. And it's not because the vaccines don't work, but it's rather that we're in this as a community, as a society together. And so, one person being protected, we don't know that means that it's safe for them to completely go back to normal life yet. It really depends on the case rates, just how many people in a given community are still getting sick. And so when that starts kicking in, that's when we'll start being able to dial back all these measures and everything that really will let us get back to normal as we remember it. And then I put this last bullet point in on the left side, just because this came straight from the new federal administration, which really, frankly, is a nice, clear statement of intent that had been missing previously. Anybody who's participated in trying to track down the vaccine, understand how it's being allocated, understand where it is, how many doses are available, you run into brick walls pretty quickly. And I think the CDC director even just this week said that even she doesn't have great line of sight into just how many vaccine doses are available at the moment, because that's just the way the system had been set up to date. And so it's very optimistic that there's going to be a shift towards more transparency and more focus on effective distribution of vaccines across the country. A few things that we really still don't know. This concept of herd immunity, it is sort of the hope and the end target here, but it's a fuzzy target. It's not a known, if we get to 80% or 70%, there's some range, and just, it's one of those things where we won't really know that we've gotten herd immunity until we get there. And so it really continues to drive home the importance of continued testing, continued masks, continued precautions until we as a society reach that threshold. The other vaccines, so Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, there's other ones in the pipeline, and which ones are going to get approved and when, and then also what the supply chain on those vaccines looks like, has a lot of uncertainty around it still. If you read the rumor press on it day to day, you get sort of different vibes and different guidance on how soon these things might come into play. But really, those will be key to helping loosen up the availability of these vaccines sort of broadly. Finally, what does the disease look like moving forward? So there's pretty wide speculation that it shifts into something that resembles the common flu as it is today, where with some periodic boosters, people might still get it every now and then, but it'll likely be a much milder disease in the future, just once more people have had some level of immunity built up to it. But we really won't know until we get there. So a lot of space there to wonder and sort of think about what the future of the disease is. But most likely this is around in some form for the foreseeable future. But again, we'll find out together as time goes on. So I just wanted to spend just a minute focusing on the actual vaccines themselves. Just, I started off talking about how wondrous these are, that they've been developed on such a short timeline. And for some people that seems scary, right? Like, it's so new, how do we know? But really the platform that both Pfizer and Moderna were built on is a mRNA vaccine platform that's been under development for decades, tested on thousands of people. It just had never really gotten sort of the use case and frankly, the investment needed to get it over the hump. So just the short answer on how it works, it takes a little sequence of genetic information from the virus itself. It teaches your body how to make that famous red little spike protein, so that red dot sticking outside of the shell of COVID. And your body actually makes a perfect replica of what COVID looks like for that one little outer part of it, which gives your immune system the chance to see it, to react, and to learn how to respond to it in the future. The other vaccines that are in development use similar methods. For the most part, everything's trying to teach your body how to recognize that same part of the virus. It just does it by different ways. Some of them being, more well-established, just, more widely used platforms previously. But all in all, it's great to have lots of different options here, just so that we can learn and, especially if mutations become more of an impactful thing, to have more ways to respond and really evolve with the disease as needed. And so I'll pass it back to you, Michele.
Great. Well, appreciate that. So that's great context really on the last mile, us as consumers kind of understanding how it got here. I wanted to now shift in perspective a little bit and invite Dr. Feldman to talk really about like the process before it gets here and give us some context so we understand why these things take time. We understand how it got here so quickly and some of the safety and or risk considerations that come with that. So Dr. Feldman, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Kimber and Michele. It's a pleasure to be here and be part of this very important seminar. So we're going to get into a little bit of the vaccine process. And as Dr. Will already mentioned, there has obviously been some concern as the two vaccines we have are a relatively new platform in terms of their exposure to the general population. But these things have been in development for years. The use case obviously happened now. And I think this is really an extraordinary advance, not just the mRNA platform, but the mere fact that we were within 1 year have had multiple vaccines that are not just effective, but extraordinarily effective is very important to understand. But just some background in terms of clinical trial development. Before this vaccine gets to what now has been in the phase 3 studies, so the phase 3 studies are the pre-approval process. They go through a relatively long period of time, which involves preclinical testing. So you have laboratory and animal testing, and that's extremely important right now. As a matter of fact, as we're getting concerned about the UK variant, the South African variant, the Brazilian variant, it allows us to take those small additional pieces of protein that make these mutated viruses different, put them in a laboratory, see the ability for them to generate antibodies. And as a way of reassurance, we can feel pretty good about the fact that the UK variant, the South African variant, and the Brazilian variant are responsive and will be, for the most part, at least in a laboratory setting, fairly protective against these new variants. So I think that's a little bit of good news, but that's really sort of the preclinical testing. Until that then gets out into the community with the vaccine and we see how people respond, we won't in fact exactly know. So we go from preclinical laboratory animal testing into human testing. Phase 1 is simply just determining that whatever new pharmaceutical vaccine that we're using is safe. That is, we're not going to give it to anyone and we're not going to cause any serious morbidity and or mortality. Phase 2 then allows us to look at dose ranging. What's the dose? Do we need to give it in 1 dose? Do we need to give it in 2 doses? Obviously, both Moderna and Pfizer are best done with a double dose followed 3 or 4 weeks subsequently for Pfizer and Moderna respectively. But that's where we kind of figure out the nuance of what's the best dose and what's the best way to deliver it. Once we get that, then we move into the clinical trials, which we're going to review briefly in a moment between Pfizer and Moderna. But does it work? It's one thing if it works in a laboratory in a test tube and makes antibodies to the virus, but it's another thing to protect and or prevent disease. And that's where the rubber hits the road. We have very compelling data for the Pfizer and Moderna. We should be just days away for the Janssen or Johnson & Johnson, which is a single dose DNA vaccine, which should be a game changer in that there are already 100 million doses that have already been manufactured. We believe the preliminary headway is about a 70 or 80% efficacy for a single dose. It doesn't need to be refrigerated or iced down to -70 like Pfizer or a regular freezer for Moderna. So that's going to make a big difference. And then lastly is phase 4. Operation Warp Speed was begun by the administration to really streamline the clinical trial process and really shorten a lot of the bureaucratic, not scientific data, but the bureaucratic pace with which things move, given the government emergency, and allowed the government to pay in advance for manufacture, storage, logistics for the vaccine. So a lot of money was spent in advance of approval because we didn't want to wait or delay the process. So we basically shortened a typical 4-year process down to about 1 year. Next slide, Mikhail. So how are we safely expediting the process? We have several government authorities. I won't go through the alphabet soup here to remind you, but that have been in place for many, many years to really help and prevent the unnecessary or unsafe practice to bring a drug to market, whether it's BARDA or CEPI, and you see the acronyms with their descriptions. Obviously, the FDA and CDC we're all familiar with, and a very important not-for-profit, obviously you're all familiar with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We're really focused on the distribution of vaccine to not first world countries like the US and the EU and Asia, but second and third world countries, because until we get worldwide immunity, we talk about herd immunity in the United States, but with free travel, unless we get 90% of the world's population vaccinated, we're not going to have worldwide herd immunity, and we won't have free travel among countries. Unfortunately, the WHO has predicted that we won't have 90% of the world vaccinated until about 2024. So obviously, though, we're looking at Q3, Q4 to begin to normalize life based on herd immunity here in the United States. It's going to take a lot longer to do that worldwide, and we have the tremendous help of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the World Health Organization to give the equitable distribution, not just among the socially disadvantaged within the United States, but the socially and economically disadvantaged worldwide. Next slide. So efficacy data, we've had the animal challenge studies. They were extraordinary. The human challenge studies. I mean, we were hoping and expecting about a 50 to 70% reduction in clinically significant disease with the present level of viruses, which is about what we see with the yearly flu vax. So to get somewhere in the 94 to 95% era is just beyond extraordinary. I mean, when the story of COVID-19 is told several years or many years from now, the scientific achievement of what we've been able to do to produce not one, but multiple vaccines in such a short period of time, and to get the type of results we have will be, the equivalent of 10 moonshots. We measure antibody production and duration. We don't know, as Dr. Will said, how long these things will be lasting. We know that the second dose, at least for Pfizer and Moderna, are an important part of sustainability. We don't know how long people who have natural immunity, having had a COVID-19 infection, and now with 100 million people worldwide having been exposed, it's not an insignificant amount, but we're certainly recommending everyone who's had COVID to wait 90 days, but to get the benefit and boost of a longer duration from the vaccines. And it is quite likely, I would agree, that we're probably going to see something similar to a flu vax, particularly given how quickly we've already seen several mutations in UK and South Africa and Brazil. It's likely that we're going to have to retool, if not every year, maybe every couple of years. The other important component is not just the B cells that make antibodies, but the cellular immunity that really are part of the team to kind of do the job. And the whole issue, and the most important thing to understand is, as previously stated, having a vaccine will prevent you with 95% certainty of getting the disease, of not getting the disease, but not getting a disease which will require hospitalization or will lead to a serious morbidity and mortality. So in the 80,000, if we can go to the next slide, if we look at the two studies, 43,000 in Pfizer, 30,000 in Moderna, a 50-50 one-to-one randomization between vaccine and placebo, we see 8 who got the vaccine got COVID in Pfizer, 162, placebo, 11 out of 196 got COVID with Moderna versus 185 that don't. The most significant thing and the single most important thing to take away, which is why every single one on the webinar and every one of their friends and family and loved ones should lean in to get the vaccine when it is available, is not a single person out of the 40,000 people who got vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer were hospitalized or died. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a low-level asymptomatic infection and, as already stated, potentially transmit that to people who are not vaccinated, who can get sick, get hospitalized, and or die, which is why until we get herd immunity, we don't want to give up the public health emergency measures of social distancing and mask wearing and staying out of large, crowded, and closed-in spaces. But you could, for the most part, sleep better at night once you've been vaccinated with one of these vaccines. So I think that's the important takeaway, not so much that this absolutely prevents transmission of the disease, which it does significantly, but we don't have the data for that. But unequivocally, to date, there's not been a single person who's gotten the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine who has been hospitalized or died as a result of getting the COVID infection, which then puts it into kind of the yearly flu, which has not, our yearly flu doesn't close the world, as our original slide showed. The world is now temporarily closed. So if we can convert COVID-19 to the yearly influenza, then we will have obviously succeeded in a major way. Next. So the challenges are evaluating data from the different vaccines. There are probably up to now 10 to 12 vaccines that we expect to see over the next 1 to 2 years. The logistics, of course, we're hearing daily with our new team. We have some wonderful people leading us with Dr. Walensky at CDC, of course, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Murthy is our Surgeon General. But the logistics are going to be a big lift. And though we're making some major strides, we're not going to see any real changes, at least for 1 to 3 months. But then I think it's pretty fair to assume that even low levels of people, low risk patients in the population will get broad scale vaccination by the second quarter and certainly the third quarter. Viral resistance and mutations we're already seeing, and that will be obviously a key part of developing future vaccines. This whole notion of understanding asymptomatic carriers is an important one. The most important thing, though, is confirming that each of the subsequent vaccines will mitigate disease the way the Moderna and Pfizer did. And the reality is that SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 is a new disease. We have a lot to learn. We're learning every day, every week. We're sharing this information in real time worldwide, but you just have to stay tuned because it's very clear that as much as we know, we don't really know very much. So to summarize, I think it's fair to say we're going to have several safe and effective vaccines, which will have widespread distribution over the next 6 months. I believe a very small percentage of the individuals will have significant side effects, more likely from the second dose than the first dose, at least from Moderna and Pfizer. But those short-lived side effects, mostly around fever, chills, achiness, myalgia, you're not going to get COVID from these vaccines, but as the body is making those antibodies, you will feel many of the side effects of a flu-like syndrome. And as I heard Dr. Walensky last night on a town hall say, and she's again head of the CDC and former head of infectious disease at the Massachusetts General Hospital, when your body is having that side effect, you can feel pretty good that you're making a good amount of antibodies. Having had the Moderna vaccine, the second dose last week, I will tell you that I had about 6 hours of where I felt chilled and achy. And, if that's the extent of what you have to feel during this COVID pandemic, then feel lucky and grateful and definitely lean into the vaccine. And I believe large scale vaccinations will happen by Q2, Q3, 2021. So I thank you and looking forward to an active Q&A.
Great. Thank you, doctors. Appreciate it. So let's pick off a couple key questions. You talked about the mutant strains. Is there, just real quick, let's start with you, Dr. Feldman. Is there any additional concern, or are they basically in the same ballpark as what we're dealing with?
Well, no, there is some real concern in that it appears, at least for the UK, where we have the most information, that it's considerably more contagious than the initial coronavirus. And increased contagiousness will lead to increased hospitalizations and death rate, even though we don't have any clear indication that the actual likelihood of an individual getting it will make it more likely that they die. More people will be hospitalized and die because more people will get it. But if the virus is in fact more contagious, then our normal masking and social distancing that might have protected you with the original one may not protect you going forward. Thereby, we're absolutely saying, and we know there's about 25 states that already have the UK variant. Here in South Florida, we just identified about 50 cases in the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area. So just absolutely, if you're not vaccinated, 100%, there's even been some consideration about double mask wearing, but please be careful. These variants are at minimum more contagious and possibly more deadly. So we do have some real concerns. I think the good news on that, at least, is the present vaccines will be protective to a large degree.
Got it. Thank you. Will, let me go to you with the next question. So yeah, long-term side effects, what do we know? Dr. Feldman kind of indicated a little bit about the path it's on, but where do you sit on this?
And that gets into the idea of like the newness of the vaccines, right? Like it's, these are the first widespread applications of mRNA vaccines, especially when we talk about genetic vaccines, it just sort of sounds like X-Men scary, right? Like genetics. But the reality is this platform's been under development for well over a decade. It's been looked at for lots of different applications, trying to make it work for other viruses. And so the safety profile of it's been studied for a really long time. It was really more just finding the right target and, again, frankly, just the money to get it going and really over that hump of investment to get it investigated enough to get it widely used. So it's lots of safety data on the technology itself for a long time, and really scientifically no reason to think that mRNA does anything but just send a quick message and then dissolve. No real way for it to interact with your own genetic information.
I think, Michele, the only thing I would add there would be that though we clearly don't know the side effects 10 years, we know from prior vaccines extremely unusual, but in a risk versus benefit, I can tell you that the side effects of not getting vaccinated because you're worried about something 10 years down the road is going to be a lot less than continued exposure to the opportunity to get COVID over the next 10 years. So to me, it's a big non-issue relative to the decision-making process.
Thank you for that. So Dr. Feldman, let me go with you. So who actually decides which vaccine to distribute? Do consumers even have a choice, or they're just step right up and lean in?
Yeah. Right now, the way the vaccine distribution is going, you don't have a choice, and you certainly shouldn't be concerned. You should step right up to whatever vaccine you get, even if you're looking at it. Let's just say J&J winds up being 70 to 80%. That's still going to give you all of the protection against the likelihood of being hospitalized or dying from this. We may get to the point down the road where we have 5, 6, 8, 10 vaccines. They're widely available. Everyone's got their first go round, that you may have some choice. The decisions are basically being made based on availability from the federal government down to the state level. Then the state level are coordinating at a local how they distribute it, and how they distribute it is relatively random based upon availability. So this is right now all based on availability, and one should have no concern as to which vaccine you get or don't get.
Great. Okay, thank you. And then we'll take one more and then we'll move on to Marina. Will, let me throw it over to you. Underlying conditions, people maybe are a little bit, have other concerns to step in line with vaccination. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure, and it really gets to that concept of what are the risks that we're comparing. And unfortunately, because the disease COVID itself is so new, there's a lot of uncertainty about what its potential risk is for some situations like immune compromise, pregnancy, things along those lines. And so, even though the vaccines themselves haven't been studied in large numbers of people in those populations, it's important to approach it as we're comparing one unknown potential risk with another unknown. Personally, the way I look at it is the vaccine is a known quantity. It's going to continue to get studied, where the virus itself as we've seen with so many people, there's such a wide range of potential symptoms, potential impacts. I see it as a little bit more of a bit of a wild card. And so of the two, for people who qualify based on the area that they live in, our recommendation as a practice is talk to your provider, get the guidance, make sure that's customized for your particular underlying condition. But, if you're a healthcare worker and happen to be pregnant, chances are we're going to nudge you towards considering getting the vaccine sooner rather than later, just to sort of lean on the side of the vaccines, the more known of the two things with some uncertainty around them.
Great. Doctors, thank you. We're going to leave it there and move on, but appreciate you guys being here, translating this for us. Also appreciate what your companies are doing to guide people through this. Right Way, of course, is a concierge service helping to get folks to the testing and the care that their companies are sponsoring or supporting. And one of those resources, of course, is One Medical, who I know, Will, you guys have a whole program and you're doing some great webinars. So check out the One Medical webinars as well that really go over the way they're supporting and guiding folks through this experience. So thank you both for your time and insights today. Appreciate it. So, and again, we'll answer additional questions as we get in the bonus round of Q&A. So Marina, thank you for your patience. Now let's go this from a legal standpoint. So many employers, like, can I, where are the lines here? Can I insist on vaccination? Should I not touch it? People are mixed on this topic. There's definitely laws and rules and points of view. So take us through some of that, please.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me. And I'm Marina Satalis. As you've heard, I am a partner and the head of the practice, the employment law practice at Wilson Sonsini. I'm delighted to be with you today to share some insights on some of the employment law considerations around the vaccine. And yes, we are getting lots of questions from our clients as to whether they can mandate the vaccine. Should they be preparing policies to mandate the vaccine for their workforce when they're ready to come back? And thankfully, the EEOC has provided some guidance on the issue. The EEOC issued new guidance in mid-December addressing this issue about vaccinations. And it provided a roadmap in that guidance as to what employers can and cannot do by way of requiring employees to get COVID-19 vaccinations. And in short, yes, you can have a mandatory vaccination policy that employees cannot return to the workplace unless they've received the COVID-19 vaccine. But there are exceptions here, notable exceptions that we will highlight, and some limitations to that yes answer. I'll also note that the EEOC was clear that employers can request proof that employees have received the COVID-19 vaccination. There's some little provisos here, some warnings. You don't want to get more information than what you need. And you certainly don't want to get information about anybody's potential disability, reasons why they did not obtain a vaccine if you're going to get into medical information or a disability, unless that's purposeful and lawful. And we'll talk about that too. You also want to take steps and be careful about sharing that information more broadly in the workforce as to who received the vaccine and who didn't receive a vaccine, because you can imagine in some circumstances there might be retaliation against those who did not receive the vaccine. I don't want to work with that person. I don't want to work near that person. That person's contributing to ills, and there could be some backlash. Also, giving information about what disabilities or medical conditions various employees may have is rife with problems. There's potential discrimination claims depending on how things unfold. Asking why an employee has not been vaccinated may elicit information about disabilities. And again, that would be subject to the pertinent standard under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is employers can't ask about employees' medical conditions or disabilities unless those questions are, quote, job related and consistent with business necessity. I'll also note here that to the extent that employers are making arrangements to deliver the vaccine to their employees, there are screening questions that are asked of employees before they take the vaccine. And to the extent that the employer is asking those questions, again, we're getting into sort of ADA land. We're getting into questions that may implicate disability or medical related issues. So they have to be job related and consistent with business necessity. The way to avoid that, where disability related questions, screening questions, are not dangerous in that regard is offering the vaccine on a voluntary basis instead of on a mandatory basis, such that those screening questions are also voluntary. And if an employee refuses to answer the screening questions because they don't want to get the vaccine, there are no adverse consequences by the employer. In that situation, you can ask them on a voluntary basis. The other thing is you can have the employees receive a mandated vaccine from a third party that doesn't have a contract with the employer, like their own healthcare provider or a pharmacy or something like that, so long as you're not receiving information about their medical condition back. So the slide that we have in front of us, this is the first big exception. You know, when we say, yes, you can mandate the vaccine, but this is the first big but, and that is employees who may have a disability. And there will be employees who say, I can't have the vaccine because of a medical condition I have, or because of the impact it may have on my health as a result of a disability or a medical condition that I have. And the EEOC has laid out very carefully in its guidance what to do in that circumstance. So you're an employer, you want your employees to be vaccinated, but somebody says, I can't because I have a disability. Well, the first question is, would the unvaccinated employee pose a direct threat due to a significant risk of substantial harm to the health and safety of the individual or others? That's the first question. And the EEOC says you have to do a particularized assessment in each case. And you have to consider the duration of the risk, the nature and the severity of the potential harm, the likelihood that the potential harm will occur, and the imminence of the potential harm. So there's a process here, a discussion, a real consideration that the employer has to go through to address that point. If so, if you conclude, yes, they will pose a direct threat if they're not vaccinated, the question becomes, is there a reasonable accommodation that we can provide to address that risk? And if the answer is no, you still can't terminate the employee who is refusing the vaccine. You can exclude them from the workforce and say potentially work remotely, but not necessarily terminate them. You can only terminate them if even that is not possible. No accommodation is possible in that circumstance. And you know, that's highly specialized, particularized. It depends on what they do and where they do it, and sort of what's going on in the world with regard to COVID at that time and how direct the threat it's posing. So we'll move on to the next big exception, which is religion, the religious exception. An employee may raise their hand and say, I can't have the vaccine because of a sincerely held religious practice or belief. My religion forbids me, it's inconsistent with my religion to be vaccinated. And you'll find that, you know, employees may raise their hand and rely on this religious exception, even if you've never heard that they really even practiced that religion before. You know, this is the way that sometimes parents have sort of gotten out of having their children vaccinated, you know, with regard to other vaccines for schools and things to try and, you know, fit into this religious exception. And it's a broad exception. A sincerely held but non-religious opposition, by the way, is not legally sufficient. You have to demonstrate that it's based on a genuine religious belief. Now, religion is defined very, very broadly under Title VII. It's not just traditional organized religions, but it's also religious beliefs that are new, uncommon, not part of a formal church or sect, only subscribed to by a small number of people, or that seem illogical or unreasonable to others. So very, very broad in terms of your religion. And it can be religious under Title VII, even if the employee is affiliated with a religious group that does not even espouse or recognize that individual's belief or practice. So not surprisingly, the EEO says an employer should assume that an employee's request for religious accommodation is based on a sincerely held religious belief. You can ask for proof in some circumstances, but it's a pretty broad exception. So if they raise their hand and they raise the religious exception, again, you have an accommodation obligation. So you have to figure out, is there a way that I can accommodate this person? And if not, they can be excluded from the workforce and potentially terminated from their employment. Now, an employee who is not disabled and doesn't have a religious basis for refusing the vaccine may be excluded from the workforce in accordance with a proper mandatory vaccination policy. There will be people, anti-vaxxers and others, who say, I don't feel safe, I feel it was rushed, whatever reason, I'm not taking the vaccine. And they don't fit into the two exceptions we talked about. So those people don't have the legal protections that the groups that I just talked about do have. But it's not without risk to take an adverse employment action against those people. First of all, there could be a disparate impact claim. Pregnant women, for example, don't fall into the categories I've talked about. But I was just reading last night that, apparently the vaccine is not recommended for pregnant women. And so you may have more than one pregnant woman in the workforce who says, I'm not going to take the vaccine because I'm pregnant. And if you have a mandatory vaccine policy and it has a disparate impact on women because they're the ones who are pregnant, they may have a claim, a discrimination claim there. Also, employees who suffer adverse employment actions for refusing to be vaccinated may have a creative wrongful discharge claim on the basis of the fact that at this point, the vaccine is being given based on emergency use authorization law. And that the FDA is required to let recipients know that it's purely voluntary if it's under emergency use authorization. So if you mandate it as an employer, a creative plaintiff's lawyer may say it's wrongful discharge in violation of the public policy articulated there. So there are attendant risks, and there are others as well. I also just wanted to raise the fact that while I totally agree with the doctors that everyone should be vaccinated and everybody should line up as quickly as they can to do it, all the studies and surveys and things that I read show that there are more people than you think who, at least at this point, are saying they're not going to be vaccinated. And so an employer will also be faced with that choice, which is, am I prepared to eliminate X percentage of my workforce because they won't comply with my vaccination policy, which is another real issue that employers will have to face. And for those reasons, we're finding that a lot of our clients are opting for a voluntary approach rather than mandating the vaccine. They're strongly encouraging the vaccine with incentives that make sense. For example, we'll pay part of the deductible for your health insurance coverage if you get the vaccine because we anticipate less usage of our health insurance plan if you do so. So it's something to consider, a mandatory plan, a voluntary plan, and all of these issues that sort of come along with it.
Great. Thank you so much. Sage advice, as always, Marina. It's great having you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now let's look at this really from what does this all mean for you and how do you solve it as an employer? And there's a lot of different ways you can go about this, okay? I mean, actually, we're going to show you some of the things we're doing with our partners and how they support employers and their people. And whether this is for you or not, I think it's more about helping people understand options and the ways to solve that can actually help be useful for a webinar like this today. So I want to invite up two people who spend a lot of time thinking about this and talking to folks who are thinking about this. And those are my friends, David Finkelstein and Shandy Guzzetto. So David, let me start with you. We've had Steve Kim, our Chief Legal Administration Officer, on this webinar many times. You work a lot with him thinking about Sequoia as an employer. So my $1 million question for you is just as an example of many on the webinar today, like what keeps you up at night, like as you think about what this all means for Sequoia? And just thank you for sharing that today.
Yeah, thank you, Michele. Great question. So first and foremost, and similar to what Will mentioned earlier, it's about the human element for me personally and for us at Sequoia. We value the health and safety of not only our employees, but also everybody at our workplace. That includes contractors, that includes subcontractors, and other employees, other guests that come to our workplaces. So the health and safety of those individuals is sacrosanct. What really keeps me up at night in the context of this pandemic is imagining a scenario there we actually have a COVID case at the workplace or potentially an outbreak of COVID cases at the workplace, and being in that heat of the moment when you have a case. What do you do? Where do you start? What information do you need? So for example, given that we have AB 685, SB 1159, Cal OSHA emergency temporary standards in place right now, all of those requirements overlaying that, being able to gather the information that we need to be able to provide the notices that are required under law. And so thinking about those notices, who do we notify? When do we notify them by? Because notices obligations kick in as early as 8 hours. So and many within one business day. And what do I need to include in the notification? So there's a lot that goes into this, and then taking other actions to enhance the safety of our workplace. Switching gears a little bit to what we talked about earlier in terms of vaccines. Do we as Sequoia require all of our employees to get vaccinated? If so, when? One of the issues is a lot of our employees may not be eligible to receive the vaccine right now. So if we do go that route, when would we do that? How do we track it? And are there exceptions? Well, not are there, there are, but how do we track those exceptions and how do we ask those questions similar based on what Rena explained earlier?
Yeah, and I got to imagine a lot of people sitting in that same chair on the call today. So, Shandy, you talk with a lot of our clients. We have 63, of course, on the program right now. What are you hearing that's in addition or complementary to what David just heard?
Yeah, so I hear definitely similar things that David's thinking about. And fortunately, I get to work with so many clients on this, so it's great just to have their insight. But one of the things that are really keeping them up at night right now is just COVID testing options. So if they're getting ready to reopen their office, are they going to require their employees to get tested? And then additionally, as they're thinking further on that piece, really like how are they going to go about this process? So looking for a secure way that their employees can upload their tests. And so Sequoia provides a HIPAA compliant platform, but then we also have the great partnership with RightWay that we'll talk a little bit more about here shortly, that really gives you the option to have clinical professionals reviewing and viewing those tests. So helping to kind of take that risk and mitigation off the HR professional and just providing that one solution for employers. And then of course, this is David mentioned, and then the whole theme of today is just vaccination. So I don't think I go a day without a question on vaccinations from our clients, whether that's just, can I even require it? And then if you're going to require it, like what types of tracking solutions, but even if you didn't require it, how can we track that? What's allowed? And then of course, the educational piece to vaccination. So how can I make my employees informed about the vaccination and really provide them with the best answers so they feel comfortable going and getting vaccinated?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. So let's go show a couple things, and we'll do this pretty fast. And Landon, I'll cue you up in a second. Maybe we'll show the vaccine management feature that we're working on as part of the demo. But I wanted to start with Jordan Feldman. Hey, Jordan. Just so people can visualize, I put this slide together, but the actual testing verification is something that until people are really in the problem solving mode, they don't necessarily maybe appreciate the use case for it. And it's one of the things you guys have been awesome, like Sequoia, getting feedback from clients, what they really need, and adjusting some of this great service you guys do as part of the service experience. So explain to people really quickly the need for test verification and the visuals kind of tell the story, but maybe a little bit about the need.
Yeah, absolutely. And the return to work platform provides a comprehensive approach to get employees back to work safely and effectively. And a key component of that return to work effort is making sure that the integrity of the COVID-19 test is accurate, is up to date, is verifiable. And RightWay uses its clinical navigation team to examine every COVID-19 test to match things like dates, test type, format. Is it PCR? Is it saliva? Does the name and birthday match the name and birthday of the test name? So as we're thinking about getting our employees back to work safely, and as we're thinking about implementing these return to work strategies, we want to make sure that each of our members, as they're going through this great return to work portal, are able to submit verifiable evidence that they did go get a test. And if they have different allowable tests for how they can return to work, that our clinical navigation team is verifying those, is saying everything checks out, this member has a good test, they can show up to the office good to go. Now, if they don't have a good test, or if they test positive and need to figure out what to do, that's where the RightWay navigation team can really step in, make sure that member knows what the next steps are, how they can access telemedicine, how they can, get educated about the steps to their recovery. So the verification process is critical as really that execution, implementation, verification step of the broader return to work platform.
Got it. Makes sense. And so we're working on a new service with you guys. Just give a quick mention of what this is.
Yeah, so a lot of the work to date prior to the vaccine has really been around the test. You have to show a negative test to show back up to work. But we've added an element to the return to work verification process, which is, you don't, if you get the vaccine, that could be your boarding pass to be able to return to work. So as we have dual tracking of both negative COVID tests and vaccines, we're going to be able to process, verify, and allow members to re-enter the workforce with, a combination or a permutation of negative COVID-19 tests plus vaccine verification. So the company can set up the rule set up the standards, and then the Right Way clinical navigation team is going to be there to execute and verify on the return to work platform.
Yeah, and the spirit of all this is employers are investing so much in bringing and have so much on the line, and they're bringing employees back. This just is a reassurance of the accuracy and quality for protecting everyone involved. So appreciate it. Okay, and then just to close off, of course, One Medical is an awesome app, and for companies that have One Medical and who are obviously Sequoia clients, they can start from the Sequoia mobile app and access, and you see just a visual example. I wanted to highlight the nice job they're doing also guiding people through the actual vaccination or testing process. So they have a whole program to help vaccination that they're rolling out. Good stuff. Again, go check out their website or their webinars. They're doing a lot on this. So Landon, I didn't leave you a lot of time. I'm actually wondering if we should, if I could just promo the fact that you give great demos and we should do one. People should go to the website and check you out and set up their own demo with this great vaccination management feature set that we're working on. We have the Grove and other opportunities to show folks. So sorry about us running out of time. There's just such a focus on content today. Thank you, though. With the remaining moment, I just want to thank the audience and remind people we're going to stick around for 10, 15 minutes, until people get their questions answered and dig into anything you guys want to with regards to the vaccines, any of the legal considerations, and of course the software product as well. But if you were eager to see the software again, just go to sequoia.com, return to work page, talk to my buddy Landon, and he'll take it from there. So
Michele, one quick question, Michele, Camille here from behind the curtain. I know Marina has to jump off. She can't stay for the extended Q&A. So I wanted to get in one question for her that's popping up in the Q&A a ton, which is reasonable accommodations for those who maybe choose not to get the vaccine if there's a policy in place that says employers need or employees need to. So is working from home or requiring an employee to work remotely if they do not get the vaccine, is that legal?
Thank you, Camille.
So especially since so many employees have worked effectively from home all these months, when an employee falls into a classification where an employer is required to undertake that analysis of reasonable accommodation, disability, or the religious exception that we talked about, that's where reasonable accommodation comes up, not outside of that, only in those contexts. Then certainly an employer should consider whether remote work on a longer term basis can constitute a reasonable accommodation. And sometimes it will, and sometimes it won't. It depends on, what that person does. Can it be done from home? For how long? What kind of performer are they? How have they done all this time that they've worked remotely? So it's an individualized assessment, but certainly I expect that remote work will be an accommodation that a number of employers will rely on and resort to in trying to, navigate their obligation for employees with disabilities and religious exceptions.
Thank you, Marina. Appreciate you being here. I know you have a client engagement, but thanks again. And Camille, let's keep rolling. What else did you see in the Q&A that we could just start picking off?
All right, so some medical questions about folks who may have had COVID already. Should they still get the vaccine? Is there a period of time in which they should wait to be vaccinated after COVID is no longer showing up as a positive in their system?
So I'll take that one real quick. What we're generally recommending is that as long as people are feeling better, if they are eligible and are being offered the vaccine, to go ahead and move forward with getting it. We're usually counseling people to expect a little bit more side effects than if they hadn't had COVID recently. So as Dr. Ted mentioned a minute ago, just sort of, the second shot is causing more intense side effects in a lot of people. So it's sort of like making, your body sees that first shot almost as if it were the second shot, like you've already got some immunity to the disease. And so it's like seeing it the second time, your systems are all primed up to react to it. But, just in thinking of, all the potential unknowns of the actual virus itself, we are still recommending people move forward with getting the vaccine. The only other caveat there is if someone got the antibody treatment, so the monoclonal antibodies like Regeneron or the Eli Lilly drug, it is recommended to build in a 90-day buffer after that before getting vaccinated.
I think the important thing, just to reemphasize, as Dr. Will said, is just because you had COVID doesn't mean you shouldn't be getting the vaccine. We truly believe, though we don't have all of the data, that you're much more likely to have sustained immunity, because we do know when we follow antibody testing, which is again not perfect, that many folks who have COVID-19 do not have sustained antibodies beyond 6 months. So please get the vaccine. You can wait 90 days if you've had the antibody treatment, but otherwise when you're feeling better and you're eligible, which for most people they won't be till the last group, because most of the people who've done well are otherwise young and low risk, but definitely get the vaccine.
Great. And another question for our doctors is, why is the vaccine not approved for folks under 18 or 16, depending on which vaccine it is?
Well, I guess I'll take this one first. Very simply, because we haven't done the studies, and unless you do the studies, it's actually 16, not 18. But until the study's done, particularly in the pediatric population and the pregnant women population, you just can't say. You can extrapolate, but those studies are being done. They're being recruited right now. I'm very familiar with them, but it's just going to take time to accumulate data. And it made sense from a sort of a clinical perspective, is to start with the highest risk groups first, because those are the people we needed to get the vaccine at early.
Great. And a question for David, and I believe we have our Chief Legal Officer, Steve Kim, on the line as well, just about how Sequoia is handling the challenges of obtaining the data regarding COVID cases in the workplace. How have you prepared to handle the multiple notification requirements?
Sure. See, I can take it. Am I coming through on the audio?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So for Sequoia, so notification requirements under the California laws in particular. So we've tried as best we can to templatize the response, as I think David noted, right? If you do fall within the outbreak sort of provisions of the California laws, the last thing you want to do is to have to scramble, figure out the information, figure out how to report, and then do it all under the time pressure under the laws. So fortunately for us, we use our own product, the Return to Work Center, and that gives you quick visibility into headcount, all the calculations you need, and if there are cases. And then what we've done is we've put together template notices for the local health department, workers' comp admins, and for employees, so we can deploy it pretty quickly if the need arises.
Awesome. And I know we didn't get to jump into our Return to Work Center demo, but Landon, we have a couple questions about the product itself. First, what the implementation period is for rolling it out, and then some additional questions related to the flexibility of the system. Folks are calling out the fact that things may change in a couple months. And so how flexible is the software to adapt as policies do and plans do as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Camille. So great questions that have come up. So implementation timeframe, I'd usually recommend right around 4 to 6 weeks is where most of our clients are landing. This obviously varies depending on complexity as well as where the clients are in their thought process around policies and procedures. So definitely take that into account as we frame it out. But through a consultative approach, we'll definitely recommend kind of what our best practice would be from a timing perspective on implementation. So hope that's helpful. Happy to add clarity further on. And then when it comes to the flexibility of the platform, we really built it around the employer and the employee and having the ability to make it flexible and adaptable to the situation at hand, because we know one thing has been consistent throughout the pandemic, and that's just the fact that everything constantly changes day to day, week to week. So as your policies change, you're able to update those pretty seamlessly in 650, upload them into the system, push new policies out to employees for consent, and then constantly changing your strategies on cohorts versus reservations, testing. We're also going to be rolling out the vaccination verification side of it, so being able to house all that data. And I'm sure some great features are in the roadmap as well as we continue to watch this evolve and keep making sure that our platform is meeting the needs of our clients.
Thanks, Landon. And one more product related question. Someone's asking in the Q&A about contractors or guests who need to come into the office versus full-time employees. Is there the ability to use the Return to Work Center to manage guests and reservations for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's been a common one, especially as people are looking a little bit further down the road too on like, hey, how are we going to manage all the different types of employees we have, whether they be global, employees in the office, contractors, and guests. So we have added the flexibility in the platform to manage both your traditional employee, your contractors that may be more regularly in the office, as well as any types of guests. So guests that may just come in, one time or the other. We give them a unique kind of set of questions that they're able to be asked to have a similar experience to many of your employees that are coming into the office. So definitely making it flexible to accommodate that, as well as you think about other personnel, whether it's vendors, cleaning crew, et cetera, that you'd want to have similar protocols in place really to protect your employees, families, the workers that are going to be in the office, as well as the company.
Awesome. Thanks, Landon. And McKelly, we're getting just a ton of questions, which is not surprising at all, especially about the legalities for Marina, who had to jump off. So I smell maybe another webinar coming on, maybe a blog post to help address some of these, but I think we got to the bulk of them in the Q&A.
Love it. Love it. Thank you, Camille, for that. And I just want to thank everyone. Hopefully we got a good coverage. I'm looking at some of the questions and I'm happy to see some of them were addressed. A lot of them were addressed in the flow of the dialogue to the compliments of our panelists today. So Camille, do you see anything else that's just maybe one more that we want to tackle? Otherwise we'll release the, just looking real quick. We have, I think a lot was covered. So let's do this. Let's wrap it up now. Thank you guys. I love the dialogue. I love it when we get to have extra time to answer some questions. So thank you to the panelists for sticking around. We will use this as we always do to influence our next webinar series. And again, we have a slot coming up in the Grove. We have a slot coming up in February. We're even considering maybe doing something for people's employees to kind of have some of the same knowledge sharing and try to address this and take some of the burden off employers of having to be the translator. So if those kinds of things sound interesting to you, keep an eye on our events calendar. And certainly excited to see all of you back in our next webinar on the path forward return to work. So be well, be out there, be educated, and we'll see each other soon. Take care. Bye.